Part 2 of Aesop's Fables. Chapter 38. The Kid and the Wolf. A frisky young kid, which is a baby goat, had been left by the herdsman on the thatched roof of a sheep shelter to keep him out of harm's way. The kid was browsing near the edge of the roof when he spied a wolf and began to jeer at him, making faces and abusing him to his heart's content. "I hear you," said the wolf, "and I haven't the least grudge against you for what you say or do. When you are up there, it is the roof that's talking, not you." Do not say anything at any time that you would not say at all times. Chapter 39. The Bundle of Sticks. A certain father had a family of sons who were forever quarreling amongst themselves. No words he could say did the least good, so he cast about in his mind for some very striking example that should make them see that discord would lead them to misfortune. One day, when quarreling had been much more violent than usual and each of the sons was moping in a surly manner, he asked one of them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle of sticks to each of his sons, in turn, he told them to try to break it. But although each one tried his best, none was able to. I remember reading this in a Chinese school book. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one. This they did very easily. "My sons," said the father, "do you not see how certain it is that if you agree with each other and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to injure you? But if you are divided amongst yourselves, you will be no stronger than a single stick in that bundle. In unity is strength." Chapter 40. The Ass and His Driver. An ass is a type of donkey. An ass was being driven along a road leading down the mountainside, when he suddenly took it into his silly head to choose his own path. He could see his stall at the foot of the mountain, and to him the quickest way down seemed to be over the edge of the nearest cliff. Just as he was about to pull and leap over, his master caught him by the tail and tried to pull him back. But the stubborn ass would not yield and pulled with all his might. "Very well," said his master. "Go your way, you willful beast, and see where it leads you." With that, he let go, and the foolish ass tumbled head over heels down the mountainside. They who will not listen to reason but stubbornly go their own way against the friendly advice of those who are wiser than they are on the road of misfortune. Chapter 41. The Oxen and the Wheels. A pair of oxen were drawing a heavily loaded wagon along a miry country road. They had to use all their strength to pull the wagon, but they did not complain. The wheels of the wagon were of a different sort, though the task they had to do was very light compared with what the oxen usually did. They creaked and groaned at every turn. The poor oxen, pulling with all their might to draw the wagon through the deep mud, had their ears filled with the loud complaining of the wheels. And this, you may well know, made their work so much harder to endure. "Silence!" the oxen cried at last, out of patience. "What have you wheels to complain about so loudly? We are drawing all the weight, not you, and we are keeping still about it besides." They complain most who suffer least. Chapter 41. The Shepherd Boy and the Wolf. A shepherd boy tended his master's sheep near a dark forest not far from the village. Soon he found life in the pasture very dull. All he could do to amuse himself was to talk to his dog or play on his shepherd's pipe. One day, as he sat watching the sheep and the quiet forest and thinking what he would do should he see a wolf, he thought of a plan to amuse himself. His master had told him to call for help should a wolf attack the flock, and the villagers would drive it away. So now, though he had not seen anything that even looked like a wolf, he ran toward the village, shouting at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf!" As he expected, the villagers who heard the cry dropped their work and ran in great excitement to the pasture. But when they got there, they found the boy doubled up with laughter at the trick he had played on them. A few days later, the shepherd boy again shouted, "Wolf! Wolf!" Again, the villagers ran to him, only to be laughed at again. Then one evening, as the sun was setting behind the forest and the shadows were creeping over the pasture, a wolf really did spring from underneath a bush and fall upon the sheep. In terror, the boy ran towards the village, shouting, "Wolf! Wolf!" But though the villagers heard the cry, they did not run to help him as they had before. "He cannot fool us again," they said. The wolf killed a great many of the boy's sheep and then slipped away into the forest. Liars are not believed even when they speak the truth. Chapter 43. The Farmer and the Stork. A stork of a very simple and trusting nature had been asked by a gay party of cranes to visit a field that had been newly planted. But the party ended dismally with all the birds entangled in the meshes of the farmer's net. The stork begged the farmer to spare him. "Please let me go," he pleaded. "I belong to the stork family, who you know are honest and birds of a good character. Besides, I did not know the cranes were going to steal." "You may be a good, very good bird," answered the farmer, "but I caught you with the thieving cranes, and you will have to share the same punishment with them. You are judged by the company you keep." Chapter 44. The Sheep and the Pig. One day a shepherd discovered a fat pig in the meadow where his sheep were pastured. He very quickly captured the porker, which squealed at the top of its voice the moment the shepherd laid his hands on it. You would have thought to hear that loud squealing that the pig was being very cruelly hurt. But in spite of its squeals and struggles to escape, the shepherd tucked his prize under his arm and started off to the butcher's in the marketplace. The sheep in the pasture were very much astonished and amused at the pig's behavior, and followed the shepherd and his charge to the pasture gate. "What makes you squeal like that?" asked one of the sheep. "The shepherd often catches and carries off one of us, but we should feel very much ashamed to make such a terrible fuss about it like you do." "That is very well," replied the pig, with a squeal and a frantic kick. "When he catches you, he is only after your wood, but he wants my bacon. Gree-ee-ee." It is easy to be brave when there is no danger. Chapter 45. The Travelers and the Purse. Two men were traveling in company along the road when one of them picked up a well-filled purse. "How lucky am I," he said. "I have found a purse. Judging by its weight, it must be full of gold." "Do not say I have found a purse," said his companion. "Say rather, we have found a purse, and how lucky we are. Travelers ought to share alike the fortunes or misfortunes of the road." "No, no," replied the other angrily. "I found it, and I am going to keep it." Just then they heard a shout of, "Stop, thief!" and looking around saw a mob of people armed with clubs coming down the road. The man who had found the purse fell into a panic. "We are lost if they find the purse on us," he cried. "No, no," replied the other. "You should not say we before. So now stick to your I. Say I am lost." We cannot expect anyone to share our misfortunes unless we are willing to share our good fortune also. Chapter 46. The Lion and the Donkey. One day, as the lion walked proudly down a forest, and the animals respectfully made way for him, a donkey brayed a scornful remark as he passed. The lion felt a flash of anger, but when he turned his head and saw who had spoken, he walked quietly on. He would not honor the fool with even so much as a stroke of his claws. Do not resent the remarks of a fool. Ignore them. Chapter 47. The Frog Who Wished for a King. The frogs were tired of governing themselves. They had so much freedom that it had spoiled them, and they did nothing but sit around croaking in a bored manner and wishing for a government that could entertain them with the pomp and display of royalty and rule them in a way to make them know they were being ruled. No milk and water government for them, they declared. So they sent a petition to Jupiter asking for a king. Jupiter saw what simple and foolish creatures they were, but to keep them quiet and make them think they had a king, he threw down a huge log, which fell into the water with a great splash. The frogs hid themselves among the reeds and grasses, thinking the new king to be some fearful giant. But they soon discovered how tame and peaceable King Log was. In a short time, the younger frogs were using him for a diving platform, while the older frogs made him a meeting place where they complained loudly to Jupiter about the government. To teach the frogs a lesson, the ruler of the gods now sent a crane to be king of Frogland. The crane proved to be a very different sort of king from old King Log. He gobbled up the poor frogs right and left, and they soon saw what fools they had been. In mournful croaks, they begged Jupiter to take away the cruel tyrant before they should all be destroyed. "How now?" cried Jupiter. "Are you not yet content? You have what you asked for, and so you only have yourselves to blame for your misfortune. Be sure you can better your condition before you seek to change." Chapter 48. The Wolf and His Shadow. A wolf left his lair one evening in fine spirits and an excellent appetite. As he ran, the setting sun cast his shadow far out on the ground, and it looked as if the wolf were 100 times bigger than he really was. "Why," exclaimed the wolf proudly, "see how big I am! Fancy me running away from a puny lion! I'll show him who is fit to be king, he or I." Just then, an immense shadow blotted him out entirely, and the next instant a lion struck him down with a single blow. Do not let your fancy make you forget realities. Chapter 49. The Rat and the Elephant. A rat was traveling along the king's highway. He was a very proud rat, considering his small size and the bad reputation all rats have. As Mr. Rat walked along, he kept mostly to the ditch. He noticed a great commotion up the road, and soon a grand procession came in view. It was the king and his retinue. The king rode on a huge elephant adorned with the most gorgeous trappings. With the king and his luxurious howdah were the royal dog and cat. A great crowd of people followed the procession. They were so taken up with admiration of the elephant that the rat was not noticed. His pride was hurt. "What fools!" he cried. "Look at me, and you will soon forget the clumsy elephant. It is his great size that makes your eyes pop out, or is it his wrinkled hide? Why, I have eyes and ears and as many legs as he. I am of just as much importance and—" But just then the royal cat spied him, and the next instant the rat knew he was not quite so important as an elephant. A resemblance to the great in some things does not make us great. Chapter 50. The Boys and the Frog. Some boys were playing one day at the edge of a pond in which lived a family of frogs. The boys amused themselves by throwing stones into the pond so as to make them skip on top of the water. The stones were flying thick and fast, and the boys were enjoying themselves very much. But the poor frogs in the pond were trembling with fear. At last, one of the frogs, the oldest and bravest, put his head out of the water and said, "Oh, please, dear children, stop your cruel play. Though it may be fun for you, it means death to us." Always stop to think whether your fun may not be the cause of another's unhappiness. Chapter 51. The Ants and the Grasshopper. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. Oh, I love this story. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance!" And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. There's a time for work and there's a time for play. That's brutal. Chapter 52. The Donkey Carrying the Image. A sacred image was being carried to the temple. It was mounted on a donkey adorned with garlands and gorgeous trappings, and a grand procession of priests and pages followed it through the streets. As the donkey walked along, the people bowed their heads reverently or fell on their knees, and the donkey thought the honor was being paid to himself. With his head full of this foolish idea, he became so puffed up with pride and vanity that he halted and started to bray loudly. But in the midst of his song, his driver guessed what the donkey had got in his head and began to beat him unmercifully with a stick. "Go along with you, you stupid donkey," he cried. "The honor is not meant for you, but the image you are carrying." Do not try to take the credit to yourself that is due to others. Chapter 53. A Raven and a Swan. A raven, which you know is black as coal, was envious of the swan because her feathers were as white as the purest snow. The foolish bird got the idea that if he lived like the swan, swimming and diving all day long and eating the weeds and plants that grow in the water, his feathers would turn white like the swan's. So he left his home in the woods and flew down to live on the lakes and in the marshes. But though he washed and washed all day long, almost drowning himself at it, his feathers remained black as ever. And as the water weeds he ate did not agree with him, he got thinner and thinner, and at last he died. A change of habits will not alter nature. Chapter 54. The Ass and the Load of Salt. The ass is a donkey, so I'll just say donkey. A merchant, driving his donkey homeward from the seashore with a heavy load of salt, came to a river crossed by a shallow ford. They had crossed this river many times before without accident, but this time the donkey slipped and fell when halfway over, and when the merchant at last got him to his feet, much of the salt had been melted away. Delighted to find how much lighter his burden had become, the donkey finished the journey very happily. Next day, the merchant went for another load of salt. On the way home, the donkey, remembering what had happened at the ford, purposely let himself fall into the water and again got rid of most of his burden. The angry merchant immediately turned about and drove the donkey back to the seashore, where he loaded him with 2 greater baskets of sponges. At the ford, The donkey again tumbled over, but when he had scrambled to his feet, it was a very disconsolate donkey that dragged himself homeward under a load 10 times heavier than before. The same measures will not always suit the same circumstances. Chapter 55. The Lion and the Spider. "Away with you, vile insect," said a lion angrily to a spider that was buzzing around his head. But the spider was not in the least disturbed. "Do you think," he said spitefully to the lion, "that I am afraid of you because they call you king?" The next instant he flew at the lion and stung him sharply on the nose. Mad with rage, the lion struck fiercely at the spider, but only succeeded in tearing himself with his claw. Again and again the spider stung the lion, who now was roaring terribly. At last, worn out with rage and covered with wounds that his own teeth and claws had made, the lion gave up the fight. The spider crawled away to tell the whole world about his victory, but instead he flew straight into a spider's okay. I messed up this one. Okay, we're just gonna skip this story. The lesson was, pride over a success should not throw us off our guard. Chapter 56. The Leap at Rhodes. A certain man who visited foreign lands could talk of a little when he returned to his home, except the wonderful adventures he had met with and the great deeds he had done abroad. One of the feats he told was a leap he had made in a city called Rhodes. That leap was so great, he said, that no other man could leap anywhere near the distance. A great many persons in Rhodes had seen him do it and would prove that what he told was true. "No need of witnesses," said one of the hearers. "Suppose this city in Rhodes. Now show us how far you can jump." Deeds count, not boasting words. Chapter 57. The Cock and the Jewel. A cock was bustily scratching and scraping around to find something to eat for himself and his family, when he happened to turn up a precious jewel that had been lost by its owner. "Aha!" said the cock. "No doubt you are very costly, and he who lost you would give a great deal to find you. But as for me, I would choose a single grain of barleycorn before all the jewels in the world." Precious things are without value to those who cannot prize them. Chapter 58. The Monkey and the Camel. At a great celebration in honor of King Lion, the monkey was asked to dance for the company. His dancing was very clever indeed, and animals were all highly pleased with his grace and lightness. The praise that was showered on the monkey made the camel envious. He was very sure that he could dance quite as well as the monkey, if not better. So he pushed his way into the crowd that was gathered around the monkey, and rising on his hind legs, began to dance. But the big hulking camel made himself very ridiculous as he kicked out his naughty legs and twisted his long, clumsy neck. Besides, the animals found it hard to keep their toes from under his heavy hooves. At last, when one of his huge feet came within an inch of King Lion's nose, the animals were so disgusted that they set upon the camel in a rage and drove him out into the desert. Shortly afterward, refreshments consisting mostly of camel's humps and ribs were served to the company. Oh my God, they killed him. Do not try to ape your betters. Wow. Chapter 59. The Ass, the Fox, and the Lion. An ass and a fox had become close comrades and were constantly in each other's company. While the ass cropped a fresh bit of greens, The fox would devour a chicken from the neighboring farmyard or a bit of cheese fetched from the dairy. One day the pair unexpectedly met a lion. The ass was very much frightened, but the fox calmed his fears. "I will talk to him," he said. So the fox walked boldly up to the lion. "Your Highness," he said in an undertone, so the ass could not hear him, "I've got a fine scheme in my head. If you promise not to hurt me, I will lead that foolish creature yonder into a pit where he can't get out, and you can feast as your pleasure." The lion agreed, and the fox returned to the ass. "I made him promise not to hurt us," said the fox. "But come, I know a good place to hide till he is gone." So the fox led the ass into a deep pit, but when the lion saw that the ass was his for the taking, he first of all struck down the traitor fox. Traitors may expect treachery. Chapter 60. The Birds, the Beasts, and the Bat. The birds and the beasts declared a war against each other. No compromise was possible, and so they went at it tooth and claw. It is said the quarrel grew out of the persecution of the race of geese suffered at the teeth of the fox family. The beast too had caused for a fight. The eagle was constantly pouncing on the hare, and the owl dined daily on the mice. It was a terrible battle. Many a hare and many a mouse died. Chickens and geese fell by the score, and the victor always stopped for a feast. Now the bat family had not openly joined either side. They were a very polite race, so when they saw the birds getting the better of it, they were birds for all there was in it. But when the tide of battle turned, they immediately sided with the beasts. When the battle was over, the conduct of the bats was discussed at the peace conference. Such deceit was unpardonable, and birds and beasts made common sense to drive out the bats. And since then, the bat family hides in the dark towers and deserted ruins, flying out only in the night. The deceitful have no friends. Chapter 61. The Lion, the Bear, and the Fox. Just as a great bear rushed to seize a stray kid, a lion leaped from another direction upon the same prey. The two fought furiously for the prize until they had received so many wounds that both sank down, unable to continue the battle. Just then a fox dashed up, and seizing the kid, made off with it as fast as he could go, while the lion and the bear looked on in helpless rage. How much better it would have been, they said, to have shared in a friendly spirit. Those who have all the toil do not always get the profit. Chapter 62. The Wolf and the Lamb. A stray lamb stood drinking early one morning on the bank of a woodland stream. That very same morning a hungry wolf came by further up the stream, hunting for something to eat. He soon got his eyes on the lamb. As a rule, Mr. Wolf snapped up such delicious morsels without making any bones about it. But this lamb looked so very helpless and innocent that the wolf felt he ought to have some kind of excuse for taking its life. "How dare you paddle round in my stream and stir up all the mud?" he shouted fiercely. "You deserve to be punished severely for your rashness." "But your Highness," replied the trembling lamb, do not be angry. I cannot possibly muddy the water you are drinking up there. Remember, you are upstream and I am downstream." "You do muddy it," retorted the wolf savagely. "And besides, I have heard that you told lies about me last year. How could I have done so?" "How could I have done so?" pleaded the lamb. "I wasn't born until this year." "If it wasn't you, it was your brother." "I have no brothers." "Well then," snarled the wolf, "it was someone in your family anyway, but no matter who it was, I do not intend to be talked out of my breakfast." and without more words the wolf seized the poor lamb and carried her off to the forest. The tyrant can always find an excuse for his tyranny. The unjust will not listen to the reasoning of the innocent. Chapter 63. The Wolf and the Sheep. A wolf had been hurt in a fight with a bear. He was unable to move and could not satisfy his hunger and thirst. A sheep passed by near his hiding place, and the wolf called to him. "Please fetch me a drink of water," he begged. "That might give me strength enough so I can get some solid food." "Solid food?" said the sheep. "That means me, I suppose. If I should bring you a drink, it would only serve to wash me down your throat. Don't talk to me about a drink." A knave's hypocrisy is easily seen through. Chapter 64. The Hares and the Frogs. Hares, as you know, are very timid. The least shadow sends them scurrying in fright to a hiding place. Once they decided to die rather than live in such misery. But while they were debating how best to meet death, they thought they heard a noise and in a flash were scampering off to the warren. On the way they passed a pond where a family of frogs was sitting among the reeds on the bank. In an instant the startled frogs were seeking safety in the mud. "Look!" cried a hare. "Things are not so bad after all, for here are creatures who are even afraid of us." However unfortunate we may think we are, there is always someone worse off than ourselves. Chapter 65. The Travelers and the Sea. Two travelers were walking along the seashore. Far out they saw something riding on the waves. "Look!" one said. "A great ship rides in from distant lands bearing rich treasures." The object they saw came ever nearer the shore. "No," said the other, "that is not a treasure ship. That is some fisherman's skiff with a day's catch of savory fish." Still nearer came the object. The waves washed it up on shore. "It is a chest of gold lost from some wreck," they cried. Both travelers rushed to the beach, but there they found nothing but a water-soaked log. Do not let your hopes carry you away from reality. Chapter 66. The Wolf and the Lion. A wolf had stolen a lamb and was carrying it off to his lair to eat it. But his plans were very much exchanged when he met a lion who, without making any excuses, took the lamb away from him. The wolf made off to a safe distance and then said in a much injured tone, "You have no right to take my property like that." The lion looked back, but as the wolf was too far away to be taught a lesson without too much inconvenience, he said, "Your property? Did you buy it, or did the shepherd make you a gift of it? Pray tell me, how did you get it?" What is evil won is evil lost. Chapter 67. The Peacock. The peacock, they say, did not at first have the beautiful feathers in which he now takes so much pride. These, Juno, whose favorite he was, granted to him one day when he begged for her a train of feathers to distinguish him from other birds. Then, decked in his finery, gleaming with emerald, gold, purple, and azure, he strutted proudly among the birds. All regarded him with envy. Even the most beautiful pheasant could see that his beauty was surpassed. Presently the peacock saw an eagle soaring high up in the blue sky and felt a desire to fly, as he had been accustomed to do. Lifting his wings, he tried to rise from the ground, but the weight of his magnificent train held him down. Instead of flying up to greet the first rays of the morning sun, or to bathe in the rosy light among the floating clouds at sunset, he would have to walk the ground more encumbered and oppressed than any barnyard fowl. Do not sacrifice your freedom for the sake of pomp and show. That's something my entire generation needs to learn. Chapter 68. The Mice and the Weasels. The weasels and the mice were always up in arms against each other, and every battle of the weasels carried off the victory, as well as a large number of the mice, which they ate for dinner the next day. In despair, the mice called a council, and there it was decided that the mouse army was always beaten because it had no leaders. So a large number of generals and commanders were appointed from among the most eminent mice. To distinguish themselves from the soldiers in the ranks, the new leaders proudly bound on their heads lofty crests and ornaments of feathers or straw. Then, after long preparation of the mouse army and all the arts of war, they sent a challenge to the weasels. The weasels accepted the challenge with eagerness, for they were always ready for a fight when a meal was in sight. They immediately attacked the mouse army in large numbers. Soon, the mouse line gave way before the attack, and the whole army fled for cover. The privates easily slipped into their holes, but the mouse leaders could not squeeze through the narrow openings because their headdresses. Not one escaped the teeth of the hungry weasels. Greatness has its penalties. Chapter 69. The Wolf and the Lean Dog. A wolf prowling near a village one evening met a dog. It happened to be a very lean and bony dog. The master wolf would have turned up his nose at such a meager fare had he not been more hungry than usual, so he began to edge toward the dog, while the dog backed away. "Let me remind you, your lordship," said the dog, his words interrupted now and then as he dodged a snap of the wolf's teeth. "How unpleasant it would be to eat me now. Look at my ribs. I am nothing but skin and bone. But let me tell you something in private. In a few days my master will give a wedding feast for his only daughter. You can guess how fine and fat I will grow on the scraps from the table. Then is the time to eat me." The wolf could not help thinking how nice it would be to have a fine, fat dog to eat instead of the scrawny object before him. He went away, pulling in his belt and promising to return. Some days later, the wolf came back for the promised feast. He found the dog in his master's yard and asked him to come out and be eaten. "Sir," said the dog with a grin, "I shall be delighted to have you eat me. I'll be out as soon as the porter opens the door." But the porter was a huge dog whom the wolf knew by painful experience to be very unkind towards wolves. So he decided not to wait and made off as fast as his legs could carry him. Do not depend on the promises of those whose interest it is to deceive you. Chapter 70. The Fox and the Lion. A very young fox who had never before seen a lion happened to meet one in the forest. A single look was enough to send the fox off at top speed for the nearest hiding place. The second time the fox saw the lion, he stopped behind a tree to look at him a moment before slinking away. But the third time the fox went boldly up to the lion, and without turning a hair said, "Hello there, old top." Familiarity breeds contempt. Acquaintance with evil blinds us to its dangers. Chapter 71. The Dog and His Master's Dinner. A dog had learned to carry his master's dinner to him every day. He was very faithful to his duty, though the smell of the good things in the basket tempted him. The dogs in the neighborhood noticed him carrying the basket and soon discovered what was in it. They made several attempts to steal it from him, but he always guarded it faithfully. Then one day all the dogs in the neighborhood got together and met him on his way with the basket. The dog tried to run away from them, but at last he stopped to argue. That was his mistake. They soon made him feel so ridiculous that he dropped the basket and seized a large piece of roast meat intended for his master's dinner. "Very well," he said, "you divide the rest." Do not stop to argue with temptation. Chapter 72. The Vain Jackdaw and His Borrowed Feathers. A jackdaw, which is a type of bird with nice feathers, chanced to fly over the garden of the king's palace. There he saw with much wonder and envy a flock of royal peacocks in all the glory of their splendid plumage, which means their feathers. Now the black jackdaw was not a very handsome bird, nor very refined in manner. Yet he imagined that all he needed to make himself fit for the society of the peacocks was a dress like theirs. So he picked up some cast-off feathers of the peacocks and stuck them among his own black feathers. Dressed in his borrowed finery, he strutted loftily among the birds of his own kind. Then he flew down into the garden among the peacocks, but they soon saw who he was. Angry at the cheat, they flew at him, plucking away the borrowed feathers and also some of his own. The poor jackdaw returned sadly to his former companions. There another unpleasant surprise awaited him. They had not forgotten his superior airs towards them, and to punish him they drove him away with a rain of pecks and jeers. Borrowed feathers do not make fine male birds. Chapter 73. The Monkey and the Dolphin. It happened once upon a time that a certain Greek ship bound for Athens was wrecked off the coast close to Piraeus, the port of Athens. Had it not been for the dolphins who at that time were very friendly toward mankind and especially towards Athenians, all would have perished. But the dolphins took the shipwrecked people on their backs and swam with them to shore. Now it was the custom among the Greeks to take their pet monkeys and dogs with them whenever they went on a voyage. So when one of the dolphins saw monkeys struggling in the water, he thought it was a man and made the monkey climb up on his back. Then off he swam with him toward the shore. The monkey sat up, grave and dignified, on the dolphin's back. "You are a citizen of illustrious Athens, are you not?" said the dolphin politely. "Yes," answered the monkey proudly. "My family is one of the noblest in the city." "Indeed," said the dolphin. "Then of course you often visit Piraeus." Yes, replied the monkey. "Indeed I do. I am with him constantly. Piraeus is my very best friend." This answer took the dolphin by surprise, and turning his head, he now saw what it was he was carrying. Without more ado, he dived and left the foolish monkey to take care of himself, while he swam off in search of some human being to save. One falsehood leads to another. Chapter 74. The Wolf and the Donkey. A donkey was feeding in a pasture near a wood when he saw a wolf lurking in the shadows along the hedge. He easily guessed what the wolf had in mind and thought of a plan to save himself. So he pretended he was lame and began to hobble painfully. Lame in this case means disabled. When the wolf came up, he asked the ass what had made him disabled, and the ass replied that he had stepped on a sharp thorn. "Please pull it out," he pleaded, groaning as if in pain. "If you do not, it might stick in your throat when you eat me." The wolf saw the wisdom of the advice, and he wanted to enjoy his meal without any danger of choking. So the donkey lifted up his foot, and the wolf began to search very closely and carefully for the thorn. Just then the donkey kicked out with all his might, tumbling the wolf a dozen paces away. And while the wolf was getting very slowly and painfully to his feet, the donkey galloped away in safety. "Serves me right," growled the wolf as he crept into the bushes. I'm a butcher by trade, not a doctor. Stick to your trade. Chapter 75. The Monkey and the Cat. Once upon a time, a cat and a monkey lived as pets in the same house. They were great friends and were constantly in all sorts of mischief together. What they seemed to think of more than anything else was to get something to eat, and it did not matter much to them how they got it. One day they were sitting by the fire watching some chestnuts roasting on the hearth. How to get them was the question. I would gladly get them, said the cunning monkey, but you are much more skillful at such things than I am. Pull them out and I'll divide them between us. The cat stretched out her paw very carefully, pushed aside some of the cinders, and drew back her paw very quickly. Then she tried it again, this time pulling a chestnut half out of the fire. A third time, and she drew out the chestnut. This performance she went through several times, each time singeing her paw severely. As fast as she pulled the chestnuts out of the fire, the monkey ate them up. Now the master came in, and away scampered the rascals. Mistress Cat with a burnt paw and no chestnuts. From that time on, they say, she contented herself with mice and rats, and had little to do with Sir Monkey. The flatterer seeks some benefit at your expense. Chapter 76. The Dog and the Fox. Some dogs found the skin of a lion and furiously began to tear it with their teeth. A fox chanced to see them and laughed scornfully. If that lion had been alive, he said, it would have been a very different story. He would have made you feel how much sharper his claws are than your teeth. It is easy and also contemptible to kick a man that is down. Chapter 76. The Dogs and the Hides. Some hungry dog saw a number of hides at the bottom of a stream where the tanner had put them to soak. A fine hide made an excellent meal for a hungry dog, but the water was deep and the dogs could not reach the hides from the bank. So they held a council and decided that the very best thing to do was to drink up the river. All fell to lapping up the water as fast as they could, but though they drank and drank until, one after the other, all of them had burst with drinking, still, for all their effort, the water in the river remained as high as ever. Do not try to do impossible things. Chapter 77. The Rabbit, the Weasel, and the Cat. A rabbit left his home one day for a dinner of clover, but he forgot to latch the door of his house, and while he was gone, a weasel walked in and calmly made himself at home. When the rabbit returned, there was the weasel's nose sticking out of the rabbit's own doorway, sniffing the air. The rabbit was quite angry, for a rabbit, and requested the weasel to move out. But the weasel was perfectly content. He was settled down for good. A wise old cat heard the dispute and offered to settle it. Come close to me, said the cat. I am very deaf. Put your mouths close to my ears while you tell me the facts. The unsuspecting pair did as they were told, and in an instant the cat had them both under her claws. No one could deny that the dispute had definitely settled. The strong are apt to settle questions to their own advantage. Chapter 78. The Bear and the Bees. A bear roaming the woods in search of berries happened on a fallen tree in which a swarm of bees had stored their honey. The bear began to nose around the log very carefully to find out if the bees were at home. Just then, one of the swarm came from the clover field with a load of sweets. Guessing what the bear was after, the bee flew at him, stung him sharply, and then disappeared into the hollow log. The bear lost his temper in an instant and sprang upon the log tooth and claw to destroy the nest. But this only brought out the whole swarm. The poor bear had to take his heels, and he was able to save himself only by diving into a pool of water. It is wiser to bear a single injury in silence than to provoke 1,000 by flying into a rage. Chapter 79. The Dog in the Manger. A dog asleep in a manger filled with hay was awakened by the cattle, which came in tired and hungry from working in the field. But the dog would not let them get near the manger, and snarled and snapped as if it were filled with the best of meat and bones, all for himself. The cattle looked at the dog in disgust. "How selfish he is," said one. "He cannot eat the hay, and yet he will not let us eat it, who are hungry for it." Now the farmer came in. When he saw how the dog was acting, he seized a stick and drove him out of the stable with many a blow for his selfish behavior. Do not grudge others who you cannot enjoy yourself. What you cannot enjoy yourself. Chapter 80. The Wolf and the Goat. A hungry wolf spied a goat browsing at the top of a steep cliff where he could not possibly get at her. "That is very dangerous of a place for you," he called out, pretending to be very anxious about the goat's safety. "What if you should fall? Please listen to me and come down. Here you can get all you want of the finest, tenderest grass in the country." The goat looked over the edge of the cliff. "How very, very anxious you are about me," she said, "and how generous you are with your grass. But I know you. It's your own appetite you are thinking of, not me." An invitation prompted by selfishness is not to be accepted.